We have a big new Toronto Maple Leafs free agency update to go over today as Elliotte Friedman has recently came out and revealed that the Toronto Maple Leafs are targeting a new goaltender, and who that is might surprise you. So you're going to stay tuned for that in this episode of Leafs Digest, as well as Jacob Markstrom. Before he was dealt to the Devils, a crazy report came out that the Leafs were actively pursuing him. So I'm going to break all that down in this episode. Before we do, if you're a part of the large percentage who aren't subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Bear with us. The setup today is a little bit different. Darius is a little bit more blurry than usual. I'm not at my usual setup. It'll be fixed for the next video. But Darius, a lot to go over today, and let's just dive right into it. A lot of goaltending news is happening around the NHL. Jacob Markstrom got traded. There's some rumblings about some other goalies. And Elliotte Friedman came out on the Jeff Merrick show and said there's been a lot of linking Toronto to Laurent Brossoit, who we'll discuss in this video. But also another name he links the Leafs to is Anthony Stolarz. Now, he is huge. He's 6'6". He's a very, very good goaltender. And this is the first time, at least on our channel, that we've been covering the fact that Stolarz has been linked to the Leafs. It's a new report from Elliotte Friedman. Darius, what are your thoughts on this? We'll get into Brossoit in a minute because we've covered him a little bit, but Stolarz is a new guy that, quite frankly, I would love to see on the Toronto Maple Leafs. He would definitely slot in as that 1A guy.
Stolarz would be an interesting option. He's a guy who puts up pretty good numbers. And again, he's on the Florida Panthers, who are a great team. So he's put in, a pretty good season at a 9.25 save percentage. But for the rest of his career, he's kind of bounced between NHL teams and the AHL. Most of his games come in the AHL. He's never made more than over $1 million. Right now his contract is $1,100,000. That's the most he's ever made in his career. So yes, certainly a cheaper option. And again, he had a great season with the Florida Panthers, might lend to the fact that they are a good team. So I would be a little cautious about this because pairing him with Joseph Woll, again, we've talked about Joseph Woll's injury history. That could be a little bit of an issue. Of course, if this guy can't carry the load because he hasn't ever in his career, he's always kind of been the backup goalie. We're going to get to him in a bit, but I would still much prefer to spend a little bit more money and get somebody who's a little bit more proven, maybe not as a starter, but just more established in the NHL than this guy. But I think he's an interesting option, especially as, we've been talking about the Leafs could be going to a 3-goalie tandem once again.
Yeah, and you can look at his stats here. They're up a little bit. He's up and down. He's 30 years old now, so he'd be a decent fill-in, though I think I still prefer Laurent Brossoit. But it's very interesting that he was linked to the Leafs because that hadn't happened in a while. I think he was linked to the Leafs a while ago, but for the first time this offseason, Friedman has linked a different goalie besides Laurent Brossoit to the Leafs. Yep. But shifting focus on Brossoit a little bit, and we'll get back to Stolarz in a minute here, but linking the Leafs to Brossoit, Peter or Darius, I know you've been super in on Laurent Brossoit. I think he's the guy that the Leafs need to target, and we've been discussing that for a while. And honestly, I'm happy that he obviously hasn't been signed yet. The playoffs are still on the go. Might conclude tonight, depending on what happens there. But yep. Brossoit is a better option than Anthony Stolarz, in my opinion, at least, especially for the Leafs. He would be a perfect complement to Joseph Woll there. He had a great season with the Jets last year. He had a great season with Vegas the season before. We saw him perform in the playoffs. We saw all these things. So when comparing him to Anthony Stolarz, I think I agree with you. I think he's just the better option for this team.
Yeah, you're spending more money on Brossoit, but I think you're getting more with him. He's won a Stanley Cup. I know he was a backup when they actually won the Cup, but he was a big pivotal part of their playoff run that year for the Vegas Golden Knights. And again, a great season last year with Winnipeg. He's, playing more games now in the NHL because I think the NHL, like I've been saying, is moving a little bit away from the bona fide starter who starts almost 70 games every year. It just doesn't happen anymore. So I think he's the best option out there for the Leafs. He's a little bit cheaper. I've been very vocal about the fact that I think the NHL is moving away from the superstar goalie mold that wins the Stanley Cup. I know Florida could win the Stanley Cup at this point, when we're recording this, with a superstar goalie, but we've seen teams in the past, even last year, like Adin Hill, not a superstar goalie. I think it has more to do with defensive structure and the way your team plays than your goalie. We've seen a lot of teams be successful with guys who are not, labeled as superstar goalies or even anybody you would want on your team, right? I said it a couple of days ago. Would you want Stuart Skinner as the Leafs starting goaltender? I don't think so, but he's in the Stanley Cup final, right? So I think Brossoit could be a really, really good option for the Leafs with Joseph Woll and, himself. I think they could both carry the Leafs.
Yeah, and you saw his stats there. I mean, he's been good for a while. He hasn't really gotten a chance to be the 1A, but like you mentioned, for the Leafs, he wouldn't have to necessarily be the 1A. He'd probably play more than he did last year because he obviously was behind Connor Hellebuck, who is still one of the 1A goalies in the NHL at this point, who plays almost more or as much as any goalie in the NHL. So for Brossoit, unless he is guaranteed a spot, but I even think the Leafs could guarantee him like a starter 1A type role and then just go from there to see what happens with Joseph Wall, because the history of injuries for Joseph Wall is the biggest concern for him going forward. But yeah, let us know what your thoughts are on all of that. It's going to be very interesting to see. And again, Friedman, Anthony Stolarz. Let us know, do you want Anthony Stolarz on the Leafs, or would you prefer, or who would you prefer between Stolarz and Laurent Brossoit? Now, Darius, let's shift gears a little bit to Jacob Markstrom. He was dealt a couple days ago to the New Jersey Devils. A very good pickup, and I saw a funny tweet basically saying that Sheldon Keefe already has a better goalie in his, before even coaching a game, than he ever has with the Leafs and Jacob Markstrom. But a report came out essentially saying that the Leafs were actively pursuing Jacob Markstrom in trade, which is very, very interesting to me. And it kind of goes to show that whether that was a Mitch Marner trade, I doubt it. It was probably more of a prospect and pick focused deal. But what this kind of shows is, it shows that, you can see here from this tweet from Leafs Updates 21, good to know that Brad Living doesn't appear to want to give up as much to get a goalie when you already have Wall. He could have easily matched what New Jersey gave with one of their first they have remaining, and Liljegren. Nice to see some constraint, and I tend to agree here. I mean, Jacob Markstrom is a very good goalie, but he's on the wrong side of 30. He's 34 years old, and it's interesting that the Leafs were linked to Markstrom before he got dealt.
I still think the Leafs think Wall is the starter, the 1A, right? And they're going to find another guy to complement him. I think, barring injuries again this season, I think they still look at him as the starter. I think that's just the fact of the matter. And if you take away all the injury history in terms of skill, he should be the starter, right? He's a very good goalie. He's putting good numbers, and obviously he hasn't played that much in the NHL. But when he has, he's looked really good. So in terms of Markstrom, like, you would have only got him for 2 years. The return was almost nothing. I think you do that if if you're the Leafs, if you need a starting goaltender or a stopgap option, you could have done that. They retained salary. It was a first round pick and then like a decent defenseman. It wasn't anything that, the Devils were, peeling off of their roster that they really needed next year. Right. So not that much in return, but I think it has something to do with the fact that he was on the Calgary Flames too. Right. Like, I just don't think the Flames and the Leafs are going to make very many trades down the road here if personnel is the same in terms of management. So I think that had something to do with it too, for sure. But yeah, it would have been an okay option for the Leafs, but I think they have something in Wall and, getting a second option here in free agency.
Yeah, Brad Sullivan's been very adamant about Joseph Wall kind of being that number one going forward, and kind of shifting away from Ilya Samsonov. And speaking about potential targets, we can see that Bruins goalie Linus Ullmark will not be in play for the Leafs this summer, as he has him on the no trade list. And this is a bit of an interesting update, and it kind of lends credits to the fact that the Leafs are definitely shopping for a goalie, whether that's in the trade market or not. But Linus Ullmark will not be a part of that, meaning that, Mitch Marner probably won't be dealt to the Bruins, which we kind of knew anyway. But interesting that he's on their no trade list. It's a bit of an interesting report. Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't want to play in Toronto. They're rivals, right? I'm sure he doesn't like the team. He actually came out and said that he was surprised that Samsonov played as much as he did in the playoff series, which is a crazy quote from the opposing team's goalie. But I'm not surprised by this. I'm sure he doesn't want to play in Toronto. Toronto and Boston making a trade doesn't make sense for either team, because you're in the same division. You might even play each other in the playoffs again next year. So I'm not surprised with that at all. I don't think he was an option for the Leafs anyway.
Yeah, there were some rumors going around about Jeremy Swayman, Linus Ullmark, because the Bruins have a excess of elite goalies. But I'll wrap it up. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Do you have interest in any of these guys? And out of the couple we've discussed, who would you prefer, Stolarz or Brossoit? Thank you guys for watching. See you soon.